you may have an acquisition where the other part or some of the employees of the other party don't want to be integrated, right? How do you handle that? And like, how do you, I guess, have you seen this happen in a deal and like it threatened the deal or anything to that extent?
So I'm very fortunate to work with private equity firms, and the fortunate component of that is I get to be on the due diligence side, which means before the merger has happened. A lot of times, there's an intent, but what's interesting and helpful about that is you get a little bit of some open door view into what that culture clash is going to look like. And, I would say most M&A transactions that I have seen in the last couple of years really take culture blend very seriously. And they care that the combined company is going to be functional, because if your asset is human capital and it's not functioning together, then that's not going to be helpful, right? So it becomes something like there's assessments that you take to get an understanding of each company's culture, which is kind of like a culture test for your company, a personality test for your company. And then there's like key personnel and like how those personalities will work with each other. And sometimes this is stuff that's kind of behind closed doors with a small set from the leadership team trying to assess this and really looking at what does that new leadership team look like, in our future 2 years from now, and how does it engage and perform together. And those are really serious conversations. I will say they are the most emotional conversations in a due diligence discussion. And it's really important, and it threatens integration potential, and it sometimes threatens individuals' long-term capability with that company too. So if you have a really strong-headed, really strong, unbending person, and they're the one outlier that could break an entire integration, sometimes they're at risk as well. So it's more about how do we make this cohesive, and how do we find the path to driving value in this combined entity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's pretty interesting. Like, for those people that are pretty unbending, is it easier to try to sweet talk them over, or just say, "Hi, buddy, you're not going to fit in the new world,"
and you're out? No.
Yeah.
I've seen both extremes of the spectrum. I've seen, that person who's got the biggest personality is like the founder of one of the company getting acquired, right? And, a lot of times that can be really interesting in how that goes down. But I would say, especially in PE-backed scenarios, they're very, very, very thoughtful about the impact to, to the deal, and why is the outcome and the value worth the risk and maybe some of the actions that need to be taken to achieve that value. And it is hard. Like, if you think about it, if there's like a group of 10 people and everybody except for one gets along great, like, you're kind of singling yourself out, right? And if you can't bend, and if you can't compromise, and if you can't find a way to be a good team member, I don't think it just has to be in an integration that you're putting yourself at risk. I think that can be in any team situation.
When you are working with, sorry, I guess first, do you only work with VC and private equity?
No, I would say, but we actually are noticing a really significant shift in our client mix where, I'm going to say we're probably 75 to 95% either PE backed, or we're inside the PE working with import cos. So we are definitely seeing that movement of how our services are supporting, but we still do a lot of private held company engagement as well.
So do you work with multiple like PE firms, or is it just one that you work with?
Yeah, no, we work with a couple. So we work with some large ones, and then we work with some more mid-size PE firms. And I do like the mix of that. And I also like seeing the difference in the professionalism, and also in the willingness to take risks. So that's been, really an interesting perspective. And it's also great because for me, is if I'm working with a really large PE firm like a KKR, and then I'm working with a smaller, maybe mid-size PE firm elsewhere, I'm able to learn and see how some of these big guys work, and then I'm able to leverage some of that experience with some of the mid-market PEs as well. So I find it to be super valuable. And then at the same time, going the reverse direction when a mid-size can be a little bit more flexible and nimble than a larger PE firm as well. So there's benefits and pros and cons on both sides.
Do you have a favorite, and you can feel free to avoid this question. Do you have a favorite like people, process, or technology? And does that differ between the size of firms that you're working with?
Oh, you mean like the stack, people, process, and technology? I usually don't get to dictate my favorite because if you think about it, is your acquiring entity has a stack, right? Like this is what we use for our HRIS, this is what we use for our ERP, this is, like the whole thing. And then when they're looking to acquire someone, I have yet to have a single technology be like, wow, that was easy. We're just going to move all this data over here and it's all going to work perfect and nobody is concerned at all. That has never happened. And I think the last time I did a count, I've done over 25 merger and acquisition, post-merger integrations. And so what you do care about though is like how much friction is there as part of the integration, right? So it's not going to be easy, a square peg round hole, but like how much of an impact is it? Is it going to drive risk into the organization? Do we have to like completely restructure employee contracts? Do we need to move to a third platform and migrate two off of their existing platforms, like say HRIS? You want to move both of them off their own HRS because they're both on small or homegrown ones and need to move to a more enterprise one. But a lot of that assessment and discussion is done prior to even the deal being written because it's considered as part of the cost and also the integration, I'm going to say budget going over the next year or so.
Interesting. I wouldn't have
But
thought
I would
about
love
that.
to be like, this is my ideal. This is what everybody has to go to.
Well, I was just curious if like you really like the people aspect when it's smaller, but you like dealing with the technology when it's bigger. But that was
I see what
a
you're
great
saying.
response as well.
I see what you're saying. So I actually, I follow now.
Bad question.
I see all three of those aspects as like a three-dimensional puzzle. You can't have one without the other, right? And the size doesn't, like I will say each post-merger integration has its own like, gosh, this one's got a really big technology challenge, or, this one's really hard on our, people and the culture, aspect of it. And sometimes, they got all of the problems, right? And process always picks up whenever you want to hit the ground running fast and you're like, we'll merge technology later. So then you got very process heavy, right? Because then you're like, okay, we're not gonna integrate our two HRIS systems, we're gonna let them live alone. Well, somebody wants single report for what's happening across all the people or the ERPs, right? So now you have to figure out, are we APIing our data into a single set? Are we like, I don't know, Excel pushing data out and doing something in Power BI, right? Like there's like every possibility of how to get your consolidated view.
I was about to ask if y'all just like seen an uptick in just using APIs to do everything because everything's like API driven now.
Yeah, APIs are great. They're becoming more and more accessible with customizations. That's the problem, is like APIs work way better whenever you stay inside the box with your software, and that's helpful. But at the same time, you can now write them. So you can, produce those on the back end and get the data out much better too. So, I mean, there's all kinds of flexibility. It just depends on which technology you're sitting on and what the, short-term and long-term objective is. Sometimes tech, you're going to replace it in 12 months. So you're okay with, a quick and dirty process to get your data out and report against it, knowing that you're going to migrate and move on to a new platform in the future.
Cool. Mike, you got any follow-up questions?
You ready to get started for the security stuff? I mean, this is cool stuff too.
Yeah, sure. Let's see.
I'm sure I'll come back to some of these topics because I'm interested in how they work together.
I was feeling good about my M&A stuff though.
Yeah, I know it's good. I've had no insight into that ever, so that sounds like a hot mess to me.
It is. It's a hot mess, but it's a fun hot mess for me anyway.
Yeah. All right. What's up on your question? What's your first security question you got there, AJ?
Oh, so you're kicking it back to me. You're not even contributing anything to this podcast.
I'm contributing to the flow, man.
Okay.
Feng shui.
Yeah. Where do you see security programs breaking down the most when it comes to these integrations together?
Yeah. Okay. So I think what it is, where I see them breaking down the most, is So there's always kind of an assessment post acquisition, right? So like there's like a quiet time, everything like feels normal and everybody runs, as is. And that's typically when your technology deep dive assessment is happening. And that's when, the security deep dive is happening. And while there's definitely clarity and understanding where there's most likely the biggest risk and the biggest issues, it's then like really getting down into the details of it. And so in that first, I'm going to say 60 to 90 days is where the real items that have to be identified and resolved and put out on the table are surfaced. And then you have to kind of rebalance, right? So, okay, we knew this was going to be a risk, but it's not a risk anymore. It's an issue. It's real. It's here. It's not the way we need it to be. It's too much of a vulnerability for, the new client climate. And so we're going to have to prioritize that over something else that we thought we were going to do. So it kind of reshuffles the deck a little bit in prioritization and execution.
I have a follow-up question on that. So when y'all are looking and starting to map some of the stuff out, are you using a consistent framework to do a lot of that auditing, that assessment piece of it?
Mm-hmm. So my team, we don't do the technical assessments. We typically are going to be executing the recovery or the remediation plan after the technical assessment. But we do work with partners who perform those assessments, and the partners that I work with, who I love and I bring to as many of the engagements that we go through, they are incredibly thorough and incredibly consistent with the same type of structure and framework, just going down the full stack to be able to produce results. It's almost like, okay, we ran your health check against your system and this looks good and this looks good, but this is like not looking great and this is critical, right? And so what we end up getting is a heat map, and from that heat map, we work with my technical partners to be able to say, okay, what's our remediation plan? When does this have to get done? Is there any external threats that we have to be really thoughtful about, and working our way backwards. So that's typically how we execute it. And since we've done so many of these remediation plans, we do have the framework to be able to work within, to be able to outline at least prioritization and execution.
Right in my head, I'm like, man, some of these must take forever to do. Just thinking of how complex environments are these days. How long do they typically run, like the assessment piece?
Oh my gosh, like an assessment. I mean, it also depends on just like how they're set up, right? Like, I mean, it's kind of crazy because you still have. I actually just ran into a client last week that's still doing some work out of an Access database. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And it was like a core piece of their infrastructure that was like critical to their mission, which is kind of shocking to me. So you have to think that like some things that companies have are just not, like, oh, let's run a nice little scan on it, right? Like it requires people. I'm sure AI is becoming, better at being able to look at these things and run through it much faster. But honestly, like when I say 60 to 90 days before the full gamut, that's an honest assessment. Like it can take quite a bit of time to go through, to review, to come back through, to review, to get to those full assessments, to figure out like if it's a software platform that has, I'm going to say, customizations on it. You have to then go to vendors. You have to see like, back into their stack. And so it's just like, there's a lot of tendrils and you got to figure each item out. The good news, I will say, is you're doing your technical assessment at the same time as your security assessment, and they benefit each other, right? And like they're cohesive. One starts and one stops, but a lot of times what was built technically is the why on where you're at security vulnerability perspective.
That makes complete sense. But I'm like walking through it myself as you're like talking. I was like, man, this seems like insane to me.